Hi, welcome to Algebra 2 Common Core. Today we're going to work on factoring trinomials specifically. So let's go back and think about how we get those factors and what we can do with them in the process of multiplication. When we are multiplying binomials, we can use a process called double distribution. Double distribution just means that I am taking each term in the first parentheses and multiplying by each term in the second parentheses. Sometimes you may have learned it back in algebra using the mnemonic FOIL. So remember that FOIL just stands for multiply the first terms, multiply the outside terms, multiply the inside terms, multiply the last terms. So let's go back and remember how we do that multiplication using double distribution or FOIL. In exercise number 1, I'm multiplying 3x plus 2 times 5x plus 7. So showing that I'm multiplying first of all the first terms together, 3x times 5x, of course, gives us 15x squared. Then we're going to go to the outside terms. So that would be multiplying 3x times positive 7. 3x times 7, that's 21x. Now let's go to the inside terms. So 2 times 5x, that gives us 10x. And now let's multiply the last term. So the last term in each parentheses, 2 times 7, positive 14. Now when I look at this answer, I see that it's got 4 terms, but the middle 2 terms can be added together because they are like terms. So my final answer would be 15x squared plus 31x plus 14. So you should notice that that middle term, that 31x, is a result of adding together the outside terms and the inside terms. That's going to be important when we try to do the factoring process. Let's go on and try part B. So let's multiply our first together, 2x times 2x, that's 4x squared. Outside terms, 2x times 5, that's 10x. Inside terms, negative 3 times 2x, that's negative 6x. Last terms, that's negative 3 times 5, negative 15. Be careful with your positives and negatives when you're doing these products. Putting together my middle 2 terms, my final trinomial answer is 4x squared plus 4x minus 15. So again, we notice that middle term, 4x, came from adding together positive 10x and negative 6x. When we are factoring trinomials, there's going to be 2 different processes that we're going to use depending on whether our leading coefficient is a 1 or a different number. So in exercise number 2, we are specifically looking at trinomials that start with a 1x squared. So if I have the trinomial x squared plus 2x minus 35, I want to factor this into the product of 2 binomials. So I'm undoing the process that I did in exercise number 1. So my first step is to say, to get an x squared, I have to multiply x times x. Those would be my first terms of FOIL. Then I want to look at the last term, negative 35. I want to find 2 factors that multiply to give me negative 35, but so that I can add the middles together, I want to be able to add the 2 factors and get a positive 2x. So when we think about the factors of 35, we know that 7 times 5 is 35. The 7 would have to be positive, and the 5 would have to be negative. so that when I multiply 7 times negative 5, I get negative 35. But then when I do the outers and the inners, negative 5x plus 7x gives me that 2x in the middle. Notice that I can check every single answer that I do for factoring by just redistributing. Multiply those binomials together and see if we get back to the original trinomial. Let's try another one. We've got x squared plus 11x plus 24. Let's take a look at example B. We've got x squared plus 11x plus 24. What we can think about here is trying to find two numbers that add to give me 11 and multiply to give me 24. So when I look at these factors, I'm going to put my parentheses and automatically say that x times x gives me x squared. Two numbers that multiply to give me 24 and add to give me 11 would be a positive 8 and a positive 3. Now, of course, it doesn't matter whether we write the positive 8 in the first parentheses or the second. For the third example, we want to add to get negative 13 and multiply to get 22. So the factors for part C, we're going to say x times x. And then thinking about the factors of 22, I'm thinking 11 and 2. But since the add in the middle is negative 13, that means I want a negative 11 and a negative 2. You'll notice that negative 11 times negative 2 is positive 22. But when I add negative 11 plus negative 2, I get negative 13. Let's try one more together. So I'm trying to add to get negative 5, multiply to get negative 50. So my factors should be x minus 10 times x plus 5. Now I'd like you to go ahead and try the 4 you try it problems, like we did in these examples, and come back and check your answers when you're done. Please check your answers with those that I've written above. In each case, notice that I want to add to get the middle number and multiply to get the last number. If you have any questions about this, please come in and ask. Now sometimes the trinomials that we're trying to factor will have a leading coefficient other than 1. So if I look at example A, 3x squared plus 19x minus 40. I have to take into account that 3 that's in front of the x squared as well as the 19 and the negative 40. The first method I'm going to use is called the method of grouping. I start by looking at the product of the first and the last. So I say, okay, I need to know what is the product of 3 times negative 40. I'm going to write m for multiply, and when I multiply those together, I get negative 120. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me negative 120. The middle number tells me my add, so I'm adding to get 19. Now, for big numbers like negative 120, sometimes it's hard to think about what your factors are going to be. So I really just start at the number 1 and say, okay, 1 times 120, 2 times 60, 3 times 40, 4 times 30. And I keep going with factors of 120 until I see a combination that's going to add to give me 19. So in this case, I'm going to use 24 and negative 5. 24 times negative 5 is negative 120. 24 plus negative 5 is 19. Once I find the correct combination, I'm going to put an x next to each of them. This becomes the middle two terms that I actually would have had when I multiply my two binomials using FOIL. So I'm undoing FOIL right now. I'm going to go back to my original problem, and I'm going to keep the first term, 3x squared. I'm going to keep the last term, negative 40. And I'm going to replace 19x with 24x and negative 5x. Now it wouldn't matter which order I put those two middle ones in. Now I'm going to use grouping like we did in the last lesson. So I'm going to group together the first two terms, group together the last two terms, and insert a plus between them. I'm going to take out the GCF from the first two, so I'm going to say 3x. When I take out that GCF of 3x, I'll be left with x plus 8. Now let's do it with negative 5x minus 40. Negative 5 is the GCF, so that leaves me with x plus 8. Remembering from grouping, I'm going to look for two that match. So the x plus 8 is my common binomial factor, and I'm left with 3x minus 5. So my factors for 3x squared plus 19x minus 40 would be this right here. And you can always check by foiling or double distributing to make sure that you get back to that original trinomial. Let's do another one together. So 2x squared minus 15x plus 18. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 36. So I multiply 2 times 18, that's 36. I want to add to get the middle number, that's negative 15. So think about what two numbers multiply to give me 36, but when I add them I get negative 15. Since 36 is a positive number, I know that I'm either going to multiply a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative. Since the add is negative, I think I've got to use two negative numbers. So negative 12 times negative 3 multiplies to give me 36, but when I add them together I get negative 15. Put an x or whatever variable is with each one, and then go back to my original, keep the first term 2x squared. Fill in the missing two middle terms, negative 12x minus 3x, keep the plus 18. So again, what I'm doing is breaking apart that middle term of negative 15x to try to figure out what two things would have added together to give me that negative 15x. Go ahead and put in your parentheses for the grouping. Make sure you put a plus between them. My first pair, I'm going to take out a GCF of 2x, and I'm left with x minus 6. My second pair, because the 3 is negative, I'm going to take a negative 3 out of both of them, and I again would be left with x minus 6. X minus 6 is match, so that's my first factor, while my second factor is 2x minus 3. So the answer, the factored form of that trinomial, is x minus 6 times 2x minus 3. Now I want you to practice with the next three problems and see if you can get the answers that I get. I'm going to put just the answers down, so if you have any questions, please come in and see me so that we can go over this method together. Please check your answers for the U-Try-Its. This is going to require quite a bit of practice. This is a really foundational skill for any algebra class that you're going to be taking. So in Algebra 2, this is really important that you're able to factor trinomials with a leading coefficient. Now I'm going to introduce you to a second way of factoring these trinomials. So if the grouping method was difficult for you, give this method a try. In either case, I want you to give this method a try as well. The second method is called the box method. We were introduced to the box method when we did the grouping in the last lesson. So we're going to use the grouping again, or the box method, to do grouping. I again am going to multiply the first term times the last term, just the number parts, and I see that I've got to multiply to get a number of 30. I want to add to get the middle term, so this part doesn't change in the process. So I right away see that multiplying, I can multiply 10 times 3, and that multiplies to give me 30, but then it adds to give me 13. So that tells me that I'm going to be using a 10 and a 3. Again, put an x with each of them. Now I'm going to go ahead and make the box. So just like in the last lesson, we make our box. We put the first term up here, 15x squared. Now here's what's a little different. Instead of putting 13x, we're going to instead write 10x and 3x. It doesn't matter which order you use them in. So I'm going to say let's put 10x here, 3x here, and then finish it off with a 2. I'm looking then for each row and each column, and I'm going to write down the GCF for each. So in the first row, I see that I can take a 5x out of both. So that's the GCF. In the second row, there's nothing common to both, so the biggest thing that's common to both would just be a 1. Now I'm going to look in the first column, and I see that my GCF is 3x. Then I'm going to look in the second column, and I see that my GCF there is 2. So just like with the method of grouping, I then use those numbers as my factors. So 3x plus 2 times 5x plus 1. And again, just like doing the grouping method, I could multiply that out using FOIL, and I of course would have to come back to this original trinomial. Let's try a few more, and then I'll give you a chance to try some as well. So looking at B, I'm going to multiply the 12 times the negative 15. I see that I want to multiply to get negative 180. Sorry about the phone calls. I keep getting calls here. So let's see here. We were multiplying to get negative 180. We want to add to get 8. So we're looking for two numbers that fit that combination. So let's see here. I'm thinking that the right combination is probably going to be 18 and negative 10. So put an X with each of them so that you can put them in your box. So making the box, I've got 12x squared. I've got 18x, don't forget the x with each of those, negative 10x, and negative 15. So I'm looking at the first row, and the first row has a GCF of 6x. The second row has a GCF of negative 5. The first column has a GCF of 2x. And the second column has a GCF of 3. So my factors, 6x minus 5 times 2x plus 3. Now I'm going to talk through the next two examples, but if you feel like you're pretty good on this method, go ahead down and try the two you try it's, and then come back and check your answer with mine. You might have to fast forward the video. But if you need the help, I'm going to talk on C and on D. So let's go ahead and multiply 6 times 5. So I want to multiply and get 30. I want to add to get negative 13. Oh, this is similar to the one above. I know that I'm going to use different combination of numbers here, though. I think this time we're going to say negative 10 and negative 3. Put an X with both of them. Make your box. So this gives me 6x squared minus 10x minus 3x plus 5. The first row has a GCF of 2x. Second row, nothing is common, but because the first term is negative, I'm going to put a negative 1 there. First column, GCF is 3x. Second column, again, I'm starting with a negative, so I have to factor out a negative GCF, and they both would have a 5 in common. So my factors for this one, 3x minus 5 times 2x minus 1. Let's do part D together. So I'm looking at the combination of 6 times negative 10. I want to multiply to get negative 60. and I want to add to get 11. So the combination that works there would be 15x and negative 4x. Now, of course, I'm doing this kind of quickly, coming up with these combinations. That's probably the hardest thing to do, come up with the combination that multiplies to this number but adds to this number. So making the box, I'm going to say 6x squared, 15x, negative 4x, negative 10. So in the top row, 3x, bottom row, negative 2, first column, 2x, second column, 5. So my factors, 2x plus 5 times 3x minus 2. Now if you still need more practice, I'm going to just put the answers down for E and F. And then I want you to go down and try the You Try It's, and I will put the answers to those as well. Welcome back. Check any of the examples that you've tried, especially the You Try It's. Let me just talk about the 2 You Try It's at the bottom. If you feel like you've got it, you don't have to listen anymore. You can just stop the video and have a great night. But if you need explanation for the You Try It's, here it goes. For number 1, I multiplied the 3 times the 8 and got 24. I want to add to get the middle number, which is negative 10. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to 24 and add to negative 10. Since the multiply is positive, that tells me that these 2 answers have to both be the same sign. But because the add is negative, both of them should be negative. So negative 6 times negative 4 multiplies to 24, but adds to negative 10. Put an x with each of them. When you make your box, I put the 3x squared in the first box, and then put those 2 middle numbers, negative 6x and negative 4x, and then finish it up with the 8. I'm looking for the GCF in this first row. Well, that's going to be a 3x. In the second row, because it starts with a negative number, I'm factoring out a negative 4 to be specific. Let's look at our first column. We're going to factor out an x. In the second column, again, I'm taking out a negative because the first term in the column is negative. So 2 is the greatest common factor. So my answer on works out to be x minus 2 times 3x minus 4. Let's look at number 2. I multiplied the 4 times the negative 15, and that gave me negative 60. Some teachers call this the AC method of factoring because I'm multiplying the a, which is the coefficient of x squared, and the constant. I'm looking for 2 numbers then that add to give me negative 11. Well, think about your factors of negative 60. The combination that works is negative 15 times positive 4. So when I made my box, the first row had an x in common. The second row didn't have anything in common, so that's when I put a 1. The first column has a 4x in common, and the second column has a negative 15. So my factors are x plus 1 times 4x minus 15. We've done a lot of practice with factoring trinomials tonight. If you have any questions about any of the methods, please come and see me. In class, we'll be doing some more factoring and making sure that we're really getting to be experts at factoring trinomials. Have a great night, and we'll see you in class.